Over to you, Leslie.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the final seminar in our series for the Edge theme, the UHI Interdisciplinary Seminar Series. And I'm really delighted to welcome Professor Roxanne Permar, who is Professor in Art and Social Practice at the University of the Highlands and Islands. She is a research fellow and program leader for the really successful master's program, Art and Social Practice, which is based at the Centre of Island Creativity at Shetland UHI. Social and creative engagement lie at the heart of her research and professional practices. She's an artist who works in collaboration with other artists, community members and specialists from other disciplines in cross-disciplinary projects. And today, she's going to be telling us about rethinking visual art practices in the Highlands and Islands from an archipelagic perspective. I can never say that properly. Very much looking at an approach to creative practice where there is no fixed centre, but a multiplicity of place-based cultures. So I think this is going to be really exciting. There is time for questions at the end. Roxanne's going to talk for about 40 minutes. And then after that, if you have questions for Roxanne, please put them in the chat and we'll do our best to get to everyone. Roxanne, over to you.
Is the last of this seminar series. I've been to a number of the different seminars and I've really enjoyed it and think it's provided some challenging and valuable thinking. Okay, the notion of the archipelagic is a way of thinking proposed by the French Caribbean writer and philosopher Edouard Glissant, which I'm sure many of you here know. I like his way of thinking because it's non-Eurocentric, it's non-hierarchical, it's politicized, and essentially it's messy. I know that there's one camp that actually finds the messiness of it difficult, but I like that. It also comes out of his experience as an islander, and it's very focused on place and what he describes as the particularities of place. I'll just really quickly try to outline, or I will outline what I'm going to do today. Before I actually put up my list, which you'll see on the right-hand side of the screen, I hope, I just want to say that I'm going to share the work of 12 wonderful projects that are created by artists, visual artists and producers in our region whose practices are all very different. And the reason I really there's quite a few reasons that I proposed this topic for the seminar series. And one of the things that I felt about the view of visual art in our region is that it's very, very narrow. And I first experienced that when I came up here for the first time to Shetland in 1985. And there's a magazine, which I'm sure many of you will know, Art North, which does, to my mind, kind of promote this narrow view of what visual art in our region is. And I'm hoping that today you can move beyond that picture that you might imagine or have in your mind of many of the visual art representations or representations of our region, the land and the seas, from what I see as a conventional and narrow point of view. I really absolutely want to stress that I love a lot of this work. I'm not being critical of it. I just feel that we need to acknowledge and look at the much wider field of practice that's very exciting that a lot of artists now in this region are practicing. So, gosh, I can't see that bit in my, there we go. So I'll have a wee bit of an introduction. Oh, goodness, why is my, then I'll try to talk a little bit about why I am interested in the archipelagic and why I'm looking at visual art from this perspective. I must stress that this is all quite new for me, so it's all possibly a bit rough and ready. I will also just very briefly mention why I think social art practice is possibly archipelagic, or a lot of it is, or certainly the examples that I have encountered here in the Highlands and Islands is archipelagic. And the kinds of things that I'm going to look at and the ways in which I've kind of grouped the projects are around the kinds of connections that the artists build within these projects, the ways in which they converge and overlap with, for instance, other kinds of specialists or other disciplines in the region or beyond the region. Some of the work is extremely local, and we can look at it from what I kind of think of as a hyper-local perspective. And then got some thoughts to round up in the end. Okay, and before, okay, here, let's look at this. So before I move on, I want to kind of orientate ourselves and to think a little bit about the notion of the edge. And here you can see my geographical location. I'm not going to be presumptuous. All of you are here today may not be located in the Highlands and Islands, but maybe from other parts of the UK or the rest of the world. I've got some little circles here so you can see where Shetland is. And I also like to think of Shetland and very much work from the perspective of Shetland as being part of a larger network and being in a hub, being a maritime hub, as well as being located in relation to the Arctic. And there you see in the red circle, the 60 degrees north, which is where Shetland is located. That's the latitude. This seminar, the kinds of things which I want to float today, very much build on the seminar in this Edge series that took place in January 2021. It was called Art on the Edge, Socially Engaged Arts Practice in Rural and Coastal Communities. It was delivered by Charlotte Mountford, Amy Donaghy, Fiona Rennie, and Louise Kemaghan. Ooh, Louise's work was in that very first slide before this one. And they all had just happened to be students on our MA program. In their seminar, they explored how socially engaged artists are actively embracing collective creativity as a way of eroding, blurring, and questioning this historic line of modern art or contemporary art practices. And they showed how their situations as practitioners in the rural and coastal communities in the Highlands and Islands has enabled them to operate between places rather than being on the edge. I'm also assuming today that those of you who are here will share my view that the edge is relative. Edge depends wholly on our own perspective. So what is central for one is central for another. And as you can see and are aware, I'm speaking from Shetland. I know many of you will have been here and you may know it well. If you haven't been, please come. Shetland is an archipelago and it comprises more than 100 islands. It's a place that many people perceive to be remote and on the edge. For a long time, I have disputed this notion of Shetland being remote and in the middle of nowhere. Historically, as I mentioned earlier, I see it as a hub, and indeed historically it was a real maritime centre, part of the Hanseatic League, and today it is central to the North Sea oil industry. Its its connections in the past and currently today to extend northwards and southwards to the Baltic states to the east and westwards, beyond Iceland to Greenland. So, oh sorry, this is because sorry. So why the archipelagic? It's Glisson developed the idea over decades. I'm just going to focus on a few very few ideas around it. So there's no fixed center. In fact, there's a multiplicity of place-based cultures, interrelations and overlaps that employ qualities of immersion, openness, connection, relational process, and fluid movement across porous margins. I've also, right when I started, outlined a number of the reasons why I am attracted to Glisson, and I'll just remind you of those. The fact that it's non-hierarchical and politicized, and I like very much that it's relational, as well as being focused on place and is process orientated. So very, very quickly, just to remind those of you who may not know about social art practice or socially engaged art, I just want to point out or clarify that it's a form of practice which is considered to be situated, a form of creative practice that's embedded in a location, and the location itself impacts on the work itself and is what gives the work meaning. And this form of practice involves working with people. It's process-based rather than project-orientated, and it invites people to take part in engagement through processes of participation and or collaboration. I'd also like to point out that it is described by a variety of terms. Sorry. You may have heard of these: new genre, public art, situated practice, socially engaged art. What else have we got? Help me, folks. Collaboration, situated practice, and so forth and so on. Now, there are a number of reasons why I have started to look specifically at socially engaged art from the perspective of the archipelagic. Here you can see some examples of my work. I won't show you many more of mine, but this is a starting point, and I've looked at what I do and feel that I can see patterns for this elsewhere across the region. One of the things that I feel comes across in this work, and it's described really well by an artist called Katja Agler, is that the work is a continuous process. It kind of unfolds. It's got a boundless ongoingness, which is a phrase she uses to describe her practice. And what's important in it is that in each project or each thing that we as artists do, we move on to something else, and each of these things then becomes part of a larger whole. So there's a continuous process of ongoing relations between projects, and they build on each other. And each one is important as individual parts and helps make up an even more important, if you like, greater whole. It's that phrase that the whole is greater than the individual parts. I actually don't want to forget to credit Dr. Glenn Loughran from the Technological University in Dublin. He sparked my interest in the archipelagic, probably going way back to about 2017-18. And I invited him to speak about the work that he's doing on an undergraduate visual arts program in the west of Ireland, on Sherkin Island. And he said he wanted to speak about Glisson, his ideas around the archipelagic. And he said, oh, but of course you're already doing that. And I thought, oh, okay, I better find out about this. So what did become clear to me is the way that living and working on an island impacts on how I live, how we as islanders live and work. It also shapes our perceptions and attitudes about ourselves and our work in relation to the rest of the world. And I found that since living in Shetland, that sense of the relation to the rest of the world has intensified and increased in a way that I would have never imagined before I moved here. I lived in London for many years. Can I just say, if you can bear with me while I'm on this slide, that I'd like to just look at a little bit more about the archipelagic and social art practice generally, and then I'll go on and I'll start to show you some of these wonderful projects by artists in our region. Living in the Highlands and Islands, well, in particular, my experience here in Shetland, we have a colonial history, and I don't think this has been looked at as extensively as I would have liked. There's other ways in which I feel that Glisson's work relates to a social practice that I can see in my work, and I'm seeing now increasingly, certainly in students on our program in art and social practice as well. So the practice is characterized by a sense of uncertainty, ambiguity, and inconclusiveness. And these are qualities that are in step with Glisson's view of the world, which he sees as generally a place of ambiguity and uncertainty. So my projects, and also I would say projects that I am going to share with you today, and other projects I can see our students do, actually begin as a process of inquiry. We're trying to find things out, and we don't actually know how they're going to finish up. We don't know necessarily what the outcome will be. And, you know, we are now practicing in a world where uncertainty predominates. And I'm very conscious of this shift, particularly, as I'm sure all of you are, in the conditions of the pandemic. And in relation to the pandemic, I think it's also relevant to this kind of way of working, because of that sense of uncertainty and the openness with which we can work, and the way in which we can be very responsive and things evolve. So you've heard me mention our MA Art and Social Practice, and this is certainly very important in terms of my thinking around the archipelagic, wanting to begin to think about the archipelagic. And as I mentioned earlier, it came up directly in relation to the invitation I extended to Dr. Glenn Loughran. Our program, you'll find, I don't know if we set this up deliberately, but it was kind of almost a matter of circumstance, because here in Shetland, we couldn't get the critical mass to come to have a face-to-face in real life program devoted to social practice. So we work entirely virtually, and we have no fixed center, and our students come from a huge number of places. At the moment, the majority are from Scotland and the Highlands and Islands in particular, but we have students from the rest of the UK and other parts of the world as well. So we have this convergence of many different kinds of projects in very particularly different kinds of places. Our program, like the practice, is process-based. So students build on their learning right the way throughout, and I'll often talk to them about learning by doing. Everything's open, flexible, fluid, which is very characteristic of this kind of practice. So I'm going to begin with one of our students, a current student. Now, most of these slides are by graduates, that they'll show you work by graduates, but a couple of them are still currently with us. We have amazing students and lecturers. So for instance, one of the lecturers in our program, who's a practicing artist, Anne Bevan, is actually based here in the Highlands and Islands. One of our other lecturers is based down in the southeast of England, in Norwich. We have an anthropologist. So our program, in terms of just the folk, in terms of our core team, we're dispersed and interdisciplinary. We're all very different from each other. So I'm only going to show you some examples of work by students. This work, as you can see, was initiated by Patricia Matthews. It's called The Lost Museum of Trees. And through it, she's attempting to reconnect the northern forests through stories, art, and creative engagement. She's working in a combination of online and real-life ways, and it's building on her long-standing interest in forests and the power of nature and creativity in relation to our health and well-being. As you can see in the photos, she's been trying to get people outdoors during the worst of the lockdown period, and she's also been working to try to inspire respect for the forest and nature generally. In a way, we all will probably have seen this, but Trish also notes that COVID has been quite influential in helping us all to appreciate the outdoors again. And in a way, this helped pave the way for this project. This is a long, ongoing project. It's certainly going to last throughout the whole 3 years of her work on the MA, and I imagine it will extend beyond the MA as well. I've learned quite a lot of things from her about the forest, and I'll just share a couple of those facts with you. Apparently here in Scotland, we only have about 1% remaining native forests, and most of them are now plantations and man-made. She's therefore, with this project, trying to make connections with people in other countries so that the folk who are working with forests here and learning about forests here can compare that and share that learning and learn from the folk in other countries. Here in Scotland, she's working with Highland and the American Forest Trust, and I apologize, I've probably totally butchered that pronunciation. She's already got links and is working with folk in Murmansk in Russia and in Norway, and through her own connections, plus we're also able to extend some of the connections we have with our MA program to North America, Canada, British Columbia in particular. And I really see this project as being very archipelagic. It's unfolding, it's evolving, it's focused on questions around place, the forest, and people are connecting through learning and sharing. Okay, let's move on. Oh, gracious. Okay, so another cross-cultural project is one between Shetland and British Columbia. Susan Timmins has been working on a project called Swapping and Squawking, which is a term taken from aviation. She's based in Shetland, and she's been connecting communities both virtually and in real life with the project that you see here. She's initiated it herself in collaboration with folk that she's pulled on board with the airport here in Shetland and in British Columbia. I hope you could see from the photograph, because I've forgotten to say straight away that this is about connecting two airports. They're two small, geographically distant, peripheral in terms of a geographical remoteness. They're 4,000 miles apart. Some of you may have been to Tingwall Airport here in Shetland. The other airport is called Wilderness Seaplanes, and it's in Port Hardy in British Columbia in Canada. The project uses photography and sound to facilitate conversations between employees, and it enables them to share their working lives in meaningful ways and to connect through their shared virtual and real life experiences. The project enables the members of two working communities to share their working lives in ways that are meaningful to them and to connect through their shared virtual and real life experiences. The project began in 2019 and is still ongoing. They are using photography, sound recordings, they've published a book, and there's more to come. So it's another very exciting project. Another artist that's using international connections and who's making and building international collections, but also using a combination of virtual and real life kinds of exchanges, is Mary Carol Souness, who's based in Fort William. She's been using a range of methods to enable school children in two communities, Uist in the Outer Hebrides and Malta down in the Mediterranean, to connect with each other through different forms of creative engagement. And as I said, these are in real life and virtual. She's also used postal exchange. And in the photographs, you can see some of the examples of participants either in the process of working or displaying, I think very proudly, their stick weaving. Mary Carol is a weaver, and she's used this ancient form of weaving in these two places and throughout a number of other kinds of participatory and intergenerational projects. Throughout her time on our course, and I will say she was one of our first students, as was Susan in our very first intake. Throughout, Mary Carol has experimented and sought to make connections between these two worlds, the virtual and in real life. Okay, I'm conscious of time, but I think I'll be okay. Okay. Oh dear, let's get, oh gosh, sorry. Why? Okay, I don't know why we've lost some of Honorata's photographs. This is not good. I apologize for that. Anyway. Honorata has taken a very different kind of approach to her work in terms of making connections between communities. I started having technical issues teaching yesterday, and it seems to be following me around. One of the things I think is really interesting from this project in relation to a question of the archipelagic is the nature of the connections and the relationship between the subject matter of the project and the kinds of connections she's making with the notion of the local. So it's hyper local in one sense, in that she's worked in Inverness, where she is based, but she's worked with Polish parents who've emigrated to the United Kingdom, all of whom came here after 2005, and their preschool children, and also their school-age children. So all of the people that she's worked with are of Polish origin, and all of the young people were born in Great Britain. And she created a number of different opportunities for Polish children and their families who live in the Inverness area to take part in events and creative workshops. And the focus was traditional Polish culture, folk art, and heritage. The project encouraged a sense of national identity and increased young people's curiosity through using creative engagement in very open, friendly, and very imaginative situations, which Honorata established. So the next one, I do apologize, I feel terrible for those photographs not appearing. This is Amy Donaghy's project called Engage, Exchange, Expand. And you can see it was done in 2020. Amy's still a student on the program and is almost finished. What I found interesting is many things I found interesting about this, but Amy's built connections between the very small island of Jura, where she lives in the Inter Hebrides, and artists who are based in a scattered, dispersed way across the rest of the Highlands and Islands and the UK. She worked with 11 other artists who actually happened to be students on our MA program. And you have to understand that when Amy started this project, it was in the early days of lockdown, and lockdown really took the rug out from under the feet of all of our students and us lecturers as well, as I'm sure you all will have experienced too. But while we're accustomed to working remotely and teaching remotely, all of our students are working in real life situations in their various home communities and locations. So all of the projects were basically disbanded that the students had been developing. And this project is one that Amy developed at a time during lockdown when life as we were living it needed to be reconsidered, reworked, and in a sense, relearned. Amy searched for ways to get through those early days of the pandemic and turned to her skills as a craftsperson. She continued to make and paint and reconnect with an activity that she really loved doing. And she began to make connections in different and new ways. And for her, she writes and has talked about in seminars how it felt like she was finally, in a way, engaging, and in the sense, I guess, that students who come on our course think that they maybe are supposed to be doing. But what I like to think about in relation to this project is that it felt the right way for Amy to be engaging with the world around her in relation to her own history of practice. So she started thinking about curiosity. And I'll go through some of these things because I think it's also typical of what a lot of other artists who I know and our students were kind of going through at this stage in the pandemic. So in being curious about the objects that Amy had collected over the years, she decided that she wanted to rework them and to make them useful again. She wanted to see how far that she could take that and how expressive she could be. There's a book that was quite important to her at this time that was called The Relationship is the Project. It's a collection of essays about socially engaged practice. And this statement that was of interest to her, and which I think is relevant to what I'm kind of trying to get at with looking at socially engaged art practice, is archipelagic. It goes like this: when we work in a community engaged context, our fundamental business is human interaction. If you're not interested in people, this work may not be for you. But if you're curious about the most secret and brightest embers of creativity that are yet to be discovered, then it may be. And that's by Alia Gabres in a piece called Intersectionality in this book called The Relationship is the Project. So Amy worked with 11 participants, and some of the comments were about the inspiration, some of the feedback, I should say, the inspiration that it gave to folk. And again, I remind you, this was in a context of early lockdown when folk were uncertain, nervous, anxiety-ridden, and possibly feeling isolated. So I'll move on. The next two things I want to show you are examples where the artists have actually worked across disciplines. Not that they're trying to be scientists, and it so happens that they were working with scientists. The first one here is Rosemary Newman, but they wanted to learn alongside scientists and share what they do, how they approach. Very typical of what we, those of us who like to work in interdisciplinary collaborations, would try to gain by working with people from other specialisms. So Rosie Newman is an educator, environmentalist, and multidisciplinary artist who's based on the Black Isle. And I'm sure many of you know her because she teaches at UHI. She's a lecturer at Inverness College. And in this work, she was interested in finding ways to promote an awareness of biodiversity by connecting people to the place they live, their local habits. She's interested in bridging the gap between human beings as the other to humans that are deeply interested and deeply interlinked with nature. So her socially engaged artworks explored nature through sensory and phenomenological experiences, through a whole collection of solitary and collective events and experiences, which aimed to awaken the mind, body, spirit, and reignite the relationship with nature that she hoped would aid the well-being and benefit the living world. So what you see here is 3 distinct yet related projects. And each project differs in a number of ways. They involve different participants, they took place in different locations, and they had slightly different themes. You'll see the 3 themes at the top here called Earth, Sky, and Water. And I do apologize. I thought I had turned everything off. So all of the work groups that she worked with did engage in some kind of creative activity, and you can see some of them here. One of them on the left was in Cromarty, where she invited local residents to look at the sky at night by lying down in a boat. There was a lot of listening involved. They listened in particular in the Earth project. They listened to birds, to the sounds in the forest, and you can see them making images of the sounds. They also listened to sounds underwater. She worked with a range of different folk. She worked and places. She worked at the site of Special Scientific Interest on the Black Isle, the Merkinch Nature Reserve in Inverness, and she also worked with the Aberdeen University Field Station in Cromarty, which is where they got involved with listening under the sea. She worked in local villages and the UHI School of Forestry. Excuse me. Caroline Deere, who's based on the Isle of Skye, also worked with scientists, and her work is an example of going really, really local and looking at very, very tiny bits of our world. The project's called The Verge, and she explored the verge, analysing how we use it and why it is important for human and non-human species. They investigated ways the verge provides a space for a deeper understanding of our wider world. And as Caroline says, our perception of the world is shaped by how we engage with it, and this project encouraged a new engagement with the verge. Caroline employed a range of different methodologies in order to create opportunities for closer observation, and she encouraged a kind of open agenda and tried to find ways that all of the participants or those who were interested could become activated and develop a kind of creative agency as well. And they brought out lots of different histories, personal memories, as well as learning scientific facts and sharing stories, many of which were traditional stories. And the project slowly unfolded an understanding about the verge that was gained through these processes. And it enabled fresh perspectives and connections to take place. You can see there the different kinds of things they did. They walked, and they also made things. You'll see here they're making rope, for instance, from grasses that they found in the verge. And she's disseminated the work as well through exhibition. Also, she made a radio program. There we go. Which links very nicely to this next project, which is the artist Fiona Rennie's work. She's created a wonderful way of working, if you like, during the lockdown, drawing on a whole range of skills that she has. And she created a podcast. Initially, there were 6 different podcasts, and happily, she's been commissioned now to make more. She's based in the Isle of Lewis, And she also runs a business that I, gosh, don't know how to pronounce, Stradag Creative. You'll gather that I haven't got a connection with the Gaelic, which probably sounds weird for UHI, but Shetland doesn't have that kind of history. So Fiona is in this project, and generally with her work, bringing together a strong sense of connection with her local, with a wider connection with people in other places. She very, very firmly does not feel remote or on the edge. And one of the aims of the podcast was to challenge the stereotype of remoteness as a slow-paced, disconnected, and slightly backward way of life. And this was a way for her to bring forward some of the in-depth discussions from the program that she found really helpful, enlightening, and brilliant, and wanted to share them with the rest of the world. I'm going to move on. I'm nearly finished. Louise Kemaghan, whose work you saw at the beginning, has, in the photograph right at the beginning, has undertaken this project called Tree Lines, and its aim was to imagine environments. It was a socially engaged art project that aimed to offer an alternative point of engagement with our local natural environments. She's based in Fort William, which is a popular outdoor centre, and the project was underpinned by the idea that spending time in green spaces can improve our well-being and physical mental health. You'll see a theme emerging here among some of the artists. One of the things she was interested in doing was finding out how socially engaged art could be effective in helping people to connect more deeply to the natural environment. And again, I want to point out that this was undertaken and developed in the early stages of lockdown, and she was fortunate in that she had a window of opportunity in the very latter stages in the summer period last year in 2020. And you'll see some of the things she did. There were two phases. In the first phase, she worked with children, and then in the second phase, where they walked to the tree line, she worked with experienced outdoor folk and was being very sensitive to the ethical issues around asking people to engage in something which could be potentially dangerous. There's two more after this, and then we're done. Weather Island, Christy Tate's project, is a social practice project which seeks to explore, collect, cherish, and make new memories concerning weather watching in the Shetland Islands. So gathered and documented, these elements form the basis of a people's archive, connecting people in the celebration of island weather lore. The project strategically seeks to include younger and older age groups and will create moments for exchange and reflection. I say will, but she's already been working on this, and this has already happened. And as a countermeasure to increasing climate anxieties, the project asks the question, what meteorological knowing is held within the Shetland psyche, and can we make atmospheric connections anew? And let's see, and it's got an intentionally accessible context, places value on the folk meteorology that is held by every person: puddle jumper, gardener, fisherman's bairn, truck driver, jacketless teenager, crofter, sailor, sea swimmer, washing hanger, outer, dog walker, gritter driver, and general window watcher. Ashley Slater, who was the UHI postgraduate student of 2020, undertook an amazingly ambitious project, all based in his very locale of Blairgowrie. And he really brought together a lot of different people to explore in a variety of different ways, all through a kind of creative engagement. You can see some examples here. He also worked with a poet. And the project was featuring, well, celebrating the work of, gosh, what's his name? My mind has gone blank suddenly. Hamish, somebody help me here. Hamish, I want to say Hamish Hamilton, but I know that's Hamish Henderson, thank you. And Ashley became very involved with the centenary celebrations. And I'm just going to keep moving on and apologize to both Ashley and Charlotte, whose work is last but not least. And this work, I feel, is really interesting because it really represents a new model of practice for the Art Centre, Live Art Centre, where Charlotte is a co-director, a joint director. And during lockdown, they completely revisited their way of working. And here you see some examples of work that is undertaken through a new project that Charlotte was behind in initiating, and brings together that very hyper local with effective ways of dealing with a wider community uncertainty, if you like. It grew out of the response to the pandemic and also to research that was undertaken that identified their area as being one which, what's the word I want to use? An area of deprivation, if you liked. I'm just going to conclude. And as you know, I'm really fond of Glissant's way of looking at the world because of it not being fixed. And I think this is really important in this world where we now have uncertainty predominated. It's underpinning everything. We're now working under new conditions, and I hope very much that we don't go back to the way we were previously. And the artists whose practices I have very, very briefly introduced today are aligned with positions, methodologies, and concerns that are held by a growing number of creative practitioners, both those who are new to working with people as well as those who have deep roots in this kind of practice. And I believe it's timely and necessary to reassess our visual art practices in an effort to lay down a marker during this time of change. And we stand alongside others who seek to find a language and voice to articulate our multiple ways of living and of working in order to sustain the momentum for change that has begun during the pandemic in our approaches to the arts. And that's me. Thank you very, very much. There we go.
Okay, thank you so much, Roxanne. So much inspiring stuff there, just looking at all the work that's been created through your program. It's really, really inspiring. And I know we've got limited time, so I'm going to go straight to the questions. So Pauline has asked you to tell us something about your experiences and art projects concerning mires and wetlands.
Mires and wetlands. I don't have any. Sorry. Mires. Can I have some help on that? Can you elaborate?
Okay, well, should we move on? Frank Rennie's pushing a comment. How about a UHI project to create a work of art that could be on display at other UHI academic partner colleges? Unifying geography. Art unifying geography.
That sounds wonderful. Like the idea of it. I think that that would be great. I mean, our program is based in Shetland College, but our students are spread across the region, and so there are actually some ideas brewing we had a meeting this morning, and one last week. We have some ideas for using different kinds of communities. I don't mean geographical communities. I mean folk. For example, we've been working with care experienced young people. So to look at ways of working with artists and our graduates and our students who are linked to geographical campuses, if you like, to UHI campuses, to work with different kinds of communities of people, if that makes sense.
So Roxanne, if people want to see more of this work, is there a way that they can do that? How could people see what your students have been doing and producing?
Well, we are going to publish.
Brilliant.
The irony of lockdown has been that our program hasn't had a digital exhibition like other programs. So we don't have a degree show because we don't have anywhere necessarily to have it. And also this kind of practice isn't necessarily well suited to hanging on gallery walls. So websites, those of you in UHI will understand at least the difficulty we've had in navigating the territory around websites for programs. So I think what we're now talking about doing, what we are talking about doing now, is producing digital publications for each of our graduating groups. We have a digital publication is one of the requirements for publishing. Now, each of these projects will have different ways in which they're disseminated. So many of them have websites. Many of these artists have websites, and you can look at their websites.
Yeah, that's great. I wonder if we could gather up, if there are, different websites and things. I wonder if there's a way of just sort of gathering together various links and just sharing those amongst the UHI community, and obviously people who are interested as well. Mandy Haggith is talking here in the chat about her liminal zone project, I think.
Yeah.
And keen to share the results of that. It will begin showing at Murray College, but we'd love it to tour the whole university. Yes, I think we should start talking to people about that and see how we could make that happen. Definitely. And then Jane is saying, being so inspired by the diversity of ways in which connections are being established, I keep feeling the need for a membership database as a tool for connection. Thoughts, Roxanne? Is there anything in place? Is that in relation to the MA Art and Social Practice, Jane? Are you talking about that?
Can we hear people, or is this just?
No, I think it's just in the chat, Roxanne.
Pontificate. It occurs to me that this is kind of these questions that are coming up about access to the work. It's kind of another example of the edgeness and peripherality, if you like, of some of these practices that aren't seen as the mainstream way of working. I actually feel like this way of working is very, very predominant. There's lots and lots of it going on. There's both nationally and internationally and locally. I mean, I suppose one of my aims today was to just flag the fact that there's a lot of this going on locally. And when people think of art in this region, they think of pictures on walls.
And I think that's so interesting, because the way you're positioning art and social practice, it's so inclusive and it's so diverse, and that's what makes it so exciting, quite honestly, I think. Okay, so okay, maybe one last question from Ewan, who's interested in the fact that we all now inhabit different places, remote or otherwise, at all the same time. Ideas of home and place are multiple. This is an exciting UHI thing that's been accelerated by COVID-19. Is virtual the way, or do we still need the local?
I think we need both. And I think one of the things that I do like about Glisson is the combination of interconnectedness as well as what he calls the particularity of place. So the way I kind of translate that into looking at socially engaged art practice, my own practice and our MA program, is that we have a combination. So there's a multiplicity of places, a multiplicity of cultures, a multiplicity of experiences. And we learn from all of these, and all of our knowledge and experience is enriched. I think that the virtual is extremely important for our region and for UHI. I know that our program and the students on it could not undertake postgraduate study for the most part without the use of the virtual. Interestingly, we now have about a dozen students. At the moment, we have 41 students, a combination of part-time and full-time, and across 5 different cohorts of a mix of part-time and full-time. And so what total of 41, I think at least 12 of them are from the Central Belt. So there's folk that are joining us from the Central Belt who could go to campus-based postgraduate courses, but have chosen our course for the qualities that we have. We're different. I was just in a conversation with one of the students about this yesterday. And not only the Central Belt, but down in England, in the Manchester area, etc. So I actually think we need to use all of these different ways, but it's really important to have the local in combination with the mix.
Yes, yeah. I absolutely agree with that. It's not either or, it's both, isn't it? It's both. And I think with that, we're going to have to draw things to a close, just to give me enough time to give you some information about the forthcoming The Edge conference. So if you enjoyed these seminars, please look up information about the Edge conference taking place in December on the 15th and 16th. That will be the culmination of 2 whole years we've been doing this, of seminars, blogs and other activities. Our keynote speakers will include Margaret Bennett, really regarded as Scotland's foremost folklorist, Professor Neil Sharples, who is based at the University of Cardiff and specialises in British prehistory and has done a lot of work on South Uist. And then I am most excited, I have to say all our keynotes are exciting, but I'm really excited about Professor Mike Pearson, Emeritus Professor at Aberystwyth, who is a professional theatre maker, and he continues to make solo work. He actually examined our first UHI MRes creative practice student just last year. So yeah, I suppose it's my privilege to draw things to a close. This has been our 20th seminar today, and I think we're really proud and excited about how the Edge, and then prior to that, Ruination and Decay themes have developed and really kind of promoted some exciting interdisciplinary conversations. Keep an eye on the Twitter account. You can see that, you can find that at IDR_UHI. There's also The Edge website, which is now open, where you can get onto the Eventbrite from there to book for the conference. It is an online conference. We had to make that decision because of the pandemic, unfortunately, but as Roxanne has really articulately emphasised this afternoon, that the virtual can be really a great way to connect with each other and allows us to be inclusive and diverse in what we do. So please, everybody, look up information about the Edge conference coming up, and we hope to see you there. Thank you very much, Roxanne.
Well, thank you to everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Okay.